Okay, great. Good morning. My name is Nick Jones. I'm a VP and my job title says Distinguished Analyst with Gartner. For anyone who wonders what a Distinguished Analyst is, that decodes as grey-haired analyst, okay? And I do most of my work researching in the mobile and wireless area at this time. And so in the next 30 minutes, I'm going to very quickly look through some of the key trends going on in the mobile space, which is, of course, amazingly interesting at this moment. All sorts of stuff going on. At the hardware level, we've got quad-core mobile phones, which are fast enough to give my PCs performance envy. We've got phones from Nokia with 41-megapixel cameras in. We've got Intel trying to get into the chip space. And then at the software level in mobile, we have all sorts of other exciting things. You know, there's an app for absolutely everything these days. You know, there are apps for girls to put on their boyfriends' phones, to survey their boyfriends, to check that they're not cheating on them. There are apps to stop you falling asleep on trains. You know, as you start tilting over, the accelerometer in the phone detects this and wakes you up again and things like that. So it's an amazingly interesting space at this point in time. And so what I'm going to try and do in this presentation is to look through some of the key trends and issues. And if you look at our surveys, we survey thousands of CIOs around the world. And if you talk to CIOs around the world, mobility is the second in their list of technical priorities, behind, as you can see, analytics and BI. So mobile is on every CIO's agenda around the world. But I think the interesting thing with mobile and wireless is it's no longer just about things like handsets anymore. It's actually about innovation. You know, the handset is becoming the hub of the body area network, a network of connected devices, peripheral devices and things like this. And mobile isn't just about cellular anymore. We're seeing increasing numbers of smart machines with cellular technology, not just voice phones. So, for example, if you look at some of the smart things, bottom left-hand side there, that's actually a pharmaceutical tablet bottle with a cellular modem in the lid. And when you unscrew the lid to take your tablets in the morning, it sends a signal to the service provider saying that you've taken your tablets. And if you don't take your tablets, it will remind you to take your tablets, for example. New things like NFC, touch to act, touch to pay, new forms of marketing, all sorts of things going on. And so when we look at this, we look at the totality of mobility, the devices, the peripherals, new things like M2M and smart machines, and all of these applications. I think what we've got here is something that we only get maybe once a decade in our career. And this is an opportunity to innovate, an opportunity to do something that nobody has done before. And what I'm seeing now is some very innovative new applications and approaches to interacting with customers and employees, for example. And so I guess the one message I'd love you to take away from this presentation is go and look for those innovations. Go and find the new things, because mobility is, in a sense, a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity now, with the state of the technology, to do genuinely new stuff. And you don't get that very often. Let's look at some numbers. As you know, Gartner does lots of predictions on market numbers and market trends and things like this. So here are some predictions for some of the key mobile devices. So these are what we call shipment predictions. So these are a leading indicator of installed base. So a few things to notice. As you can see, the growth of smartphones. The red bar here is smartphones, phones with an operating system growing like crazy, huge growth. In mature markets like Western Europe and North America, smartphones are displacing all of the low-end feature phones, the dumb phones, and by 2015, in the mature markets, well under 10% of the population will have a dumb phone. Pretty much everyone has a smartphone. Of course, that's not true in emerging markets. In emerging markets like India and China and other parts of Asia, you can see that feature phones, the dumb phones, still dominate. So if you're a multinational, don't forget the dumb phones. Media tablets. You can see the media tablet line here, the green line, is growing, but you know, we get a lot of hype about our iPads and things like this, but they're not the most important devices in the world. There are a lot less of them than PCs, for example. And don't forget mobile PCs, notebooks. Technologies like Ultrabook, for example, are making notebooks more viable again, and we'll see the difference between a tablet and a PC starting to get very blurred in the future with Windows 8 tablets and things like that. So mobile PCs will still be part of your strategy. As you can see, it's going to be a complex future. There's going to be a mix of mobile devices. The average senior knowledge worker, folks in this room, probably already own at least 3 devices. We've all got a laptop, a smartphone, and a tablet. So it's going to be a very complex future. So the bottom line message of this slide is, because of that complexity, it's very important to understand your customers, to understand what devices they carry, what devices they own, what habits they have, and so on. If we dig into those numbers a little bit and look at the smartphones and the tablets, the smartphone and tablet trends, what do we see here? On the left-hand side, we've got smartphone predictions. And so what you can see on the left-hand side is that Android absolutely dominates the smartphone space. Over half of all the smartphones sold in the world at this point in time are Android smartphones. This is a bit problematic for corporations because Android is the most fragmented and the least secure of the smartphone platforms and the tablet platforms, but that's the way the world's going at the moment. Apple iOS is a strong number 2. Apple does not want to become Android. Apple does not want to sell large numbers of very low-priced smartphones, for example. So Apple really wants to go for the high-priced luxury products. You know, I jokingly say that Apple is for what I call price-insensitive fashion victims, of which I tragically have to admit I'm one. Symbian's fading very, very fast. Symbian is approximately dead now. It's the little grey line that you can see heading towards the axis at the bottom there. So Symbian's a dead operating system. We believe that Microsoft Windows Phone will grow, will gain some traction in the marketplace. It's already just ahead of RIM. RIM is another disaster area at the moment. Microsoft Phone is growing, and we think it'll be possibly come into the number 2 position a few years into the future. So when you look at that, we look at the tablets on the other side over here, we can see it's a little bit simpler. The tablet market is dominated by Apple at this point in time. Android is certainly growing. However, we're not massively optimistic about Windows 8 tablets. We think that in the tablet market, Microsoft tablets will be interesting to corporates when the employer is buying it, but not to consumers. We think if a consumer goes into a shop and sees an Apple tablet, an Android tablet, and a Microsoft tablet, they'll probably choose the Apple or the Android tablet. So that's why we're not so positive about the long-term future for Windows 8 tablets at this point in time. So if you look at this slide, again, a couple of quick messages to take away. Firstly, the platform wars are not going to die soon. The platform wars will continue for years to come. That means you have to be prepared to deliver applications onto multiple smartphone and tablet platforms because they will persist for a long time. If we look at some other trends here, on the operating system front, it's clear that you can expect to see a major release of every platform operating system at least once a year with multiple minor releases. So the operating systems are going to continue to evolve pretty fast. In terms of the operating system fragmentation, I said Android is bad. One of the reasons that Android is particularly bad for fragmentation is that the old operating system versions are not going away. If you look at the cost trends, you can see that Moore's law is driving two things happening in cost trends, right? At the top end of the market, the smartphones and the tablets are getting more capable, quad-core processors, as I said. At the bottom end of the market, however, they're getting cheaper. So we've got the Android smartphones down at €75 and prices like that now, and they will fall even further. And that's why the old Android versions are not going away, because these very low-cost Android devices are running 2.x Android versions. So Android is actually getting more fragmented, not less fragmented at this point in time, unfortunately. Tablet prices will fall. We expect to see some really good $300 10-inch tablets. We think 10 inches will actually be the popular size for tablets. I think once you go below 10 inches, it's hard to type on a tablet. So I don't think if Apple bring out a small tablet, it will be as useful as the 10-inch iPad, for example. If you look at some of the performance differences across the smartphone space now, the performance difference between the top-end Android and the bottom-end Android is like 10 to 1, and they're almost different platforms for application development and testing purposes. Lots of technical trends, I won't go into them all here, but we're seeing, not only faster processors, we're seeing more sensors in phones. I'm sure future phones will measure temperature and barometric pressure and things like that, for example. We're going to start seeing, I think, the emergence of the first flexible screens, fold out, roll out, or something like that, perhaps this year and into next year. So a very diverse, very volatile, very exciting future in terms of mobile hardware at this point in time. On the wireless technology front, rest assured I am not going to discuss every blob on this diagram, but let me just pick out a few. On the wireless technology front, trends tend to be a bit more predictable. When you look at things like cellular networks, you can see here that we're going up through the HSPA plus LTE thread of development up to LTE-A, the next generation beyond LTE. And this is a pretty slow evolution. Roughly speaking, every big generation of cellular takes something like 7 to 10 years to penetrate through the population. So, you know, although people talk about LTE and it gets lots of hype, it doesn't happen in a hurry. It's going to be a long time before everyone in the country is using LTE. Other wireless technologies to watch, of which there are many, low energy Bluetooth. The current version of Bluetooth has this low energy mode for talking to sensors. I think this will be amazingly useful in areas like healthcare, on-body blood pressure monitoring systems, talking out through your mobile phone to a healthcare portal, for example. Wi-Fi again has a very vibrant roadmap. Wi-Fi is evolving through the current 11N, which of course we all use, up through 11AC, pushing performance up to gigabit levels, and also 11AD, which will be pushing performance up to multi-gigabit levels, at least inside the room, for doing things like projector connections to my PC and things like that. And of course, there are a raft of cellular and non-cellular technologies, particularly non-cellular ones, around the Internet of Things. So we're starting to see a lot of interest in things like Zigbee-7 and so on as wireless technologies for machine Internet of Things applications. So the bottom line message of this slide is your future is going to contain lots of different types of wireless networks. And there's good news and bad news, isn't there? You know, you never get just good news from the British because we're pessimists at heart, right? And because it's raining so much this year in London. So the good news is, you know, you can pretty much find a wireless technology with the right characteristics for almost any purpose that you have in mind. The bad news is there are going to be lots of them. And so there's no one wireless technology that dominates all of the requirements, unfortunately. A bit like mobile operating systems, really. Another question I get a lot, which wireless technologies, which mobile technologies should I be focusing on? What should I be watching? So here is Nick's list of 10 technologies that should be on everybody's radar screen, okay? I won't go through them in massive detail, but let me just touch on some of the highlights and why I put them in my list. So HTML5. HTML5 brings a lot to the mobile space. HTML5 means that we need to build native applications less because we can do a lot more things in web technologies with HTML5. It does have its downsides. One of my clients recently only half-jokingly said that HTML5 is a write-once, debug everywhere technology because it's pretty fragmented at this time, but it's clearly important. NFC, touch to act, mobile payment, touch to pay. I wouldn't be too optimistic about mobile payment in the short term. It takes a long time to change people's payment behavior, and it's a battleground between banks and people like that and network operators. But all sorts of other things you can do with NFC, like touch for smart posters and marketing and things. Location is clearly a critical technology for a lot of things you need to do for the next generation of cool applications. Bluetooth 4, I mentioned, low energy sensors, a very important technology, particularly if you're in the healthcare business. 802.11ac, I mentioned, the next generation of Wi-Fi, that has to be on everybody's radar screen. Machine to machine, smart products with cellular or other wireless technologies built in, I think are going to revolutionize a lot of things. So increasingly we're seeing people talking about putting wireless technology and communication in all sorts of things, you know, that you might have around your house. In the future, your dishwasher, your washing machine, your cooker will all be wireless enabled and talking to each other. Heaven knows what they'll say, but they will be doing that. Augmented reality, for those of you who haven't tried it, play with tools like Layar or Wikitude, which let you bring up the phone and have overlays of information on the real world that's seen through the phone camera. A great way of providing information for tourist applications, finding ATM machines and things like that. MDM. I'll talk briefly about security later on in this presentation, but mobile device management has become an amazingly hot topic for corporates. You've now got this problem that all of these devices are coming into your organization, people are bringing their iPads, their phones, all of these things, and you have to manage those devices. So multi-platform device management tools like AirWatch and Mobile Iron and things like that are very, very high on everybody's list. And then finally, LTE, as I mentioned. LTE brings the performance of cellular up to new levels, up to gigabit levels, and clearly we need those sorts of levels of performance and the extra capacity it brings. So this is my top 10. These should be technologies everyone is looking at. There are lots more wireless and mobile technologies, of course, that will be on your particular lists in addition to these, but you should have a plan for these at the very least. Another thought here. If I'd said to you 10 years ago, 5 years ago maybe, I'd use the words mobile vendor, you'd probably have thought I was talking about a handset manufacturer. But when you look at mobile vendors now, what you see is that the people who are driving the future of the mobile space, the Googles and the Apples, have actually got some amazingly complex business models. They're playing in lots of different spaces. They're playing in mobile payment, they're playing with platforms, they either own or have a stake in platforms, they manufacture devices, they have their own browser, they have their own app store, they're in the video business and so on and so forth. And when you look at this, what's happening here is that all of these different business lines intersect and overlap and support each other. Why, for example, does Amazon put its own browser on the new Kindle Fire? Okay, it's not because it's any better than the Android browser. It's because the browser is watching you. They know what you're browsing and they can use that to drive advertising. Why does Google want to be in mobile payment? Because every time I pay for something, they know where I am and they've discovered something new about my habits that they can use for advertising purposes. Why do people want to own a platform? Because then you can push technologies like NFC into the marketplace at your own pace rather than waiting for other people to deliver them. So all of these things overlap and intersect with each other. And it's very hard for people who don't have this breadth of business, like a mobile operator, for example, to compete with that. So the bottom line message is there are some very big games being played here in the mobile space. And you can't compete with some of these things. You will have to ally with them, to partner with them, to work with the vendors like Google and Apple, because that'll be the only way you can get to some customers. So here's a survey I did last year. This is a survey I did of CIOs in North America and Western Europe. And one of the questions I asked them in this survey was, how many different mobile platforms do you think you'll have to support this year, 2012? And as you can see, the average is over 3. Some CIOs expect to support 5 and 6 different mobile platforms, okay? And the reason I put this up is because I think this survey illustrates something important, which is that the rules have changed, okay, in the corporate space. And the new rules are that you can't tell the employees what device to use, right? The employees are going to use what device they want to use regardless. You can't standardize on platforms anymore. Long gone are the days when you could give people a BlackBerry and tell them to be grateful, right? It doesn't work anymore. Senior knowledge workers have multiple devices, at least 3. That means sharing information via the cloud, via cloud services, is becoming increasingly important. Dropbox has become like a disease of corporations recently. My security colleagues hate Dropbox for security reasons. Consumerization wins. There are no enterprise platforms left. BlackBerry was the last real enterprise platform, and they're struggling to hold 7.5% shipment market share at this point in time. Consumerization has won, guys and girls, right? The consumer platforms drive the future for the enterprise. And app stores are as big a problem or a bigger an opportunity as devices, because of course people can download all sorts of interesting apps and find new ways to work and things like that using new tools from consumer app stores. So the bottom line message of this slide is that the world has changed. IT cannot control mobile users in the way that they used to. You have to find new ways of working with your employees, new ways of supporting their desire for multiple platforms and so on. And this is one of those whole drivers behind big trends like BYO, which is a huge issue at this point in time. I would argue that you need a strategy. Strategies are great. You know, strategies are good because they give you the illusion that you're in control. Okay? And sometimes you are. In the mobile space, one of the interesting questions is how many strategies do you need? And actually, you typically need more than one mobile and wireless strategy inside an organization. You'll have one or several for the employee-facing issues and at least one, possibly more, for the consumer-facing issues. In the consumer or customer-facing mobility side, strategy is max 18 months. You know, given that the average lifespan of a mobile phone is 12 to 18 months, 50% of your customers will get new smartphones or new habits every year, right? So you can't have a 3 or 5 year strategy in the consumer-facing space. 12 to 18 months is probably as far as you can go. In the employee-facing space, you can look a bit further forward, and you need to deal with lots of issues there. You need to deal with applications for specific employee roles like Salesforce automation or Fieldforce automation. You've got to deal with new technologies for communication and collaboration, you know, microblogging and internal corporate social networking on mobiles. You've got to deal with BYO and things like that. you may have to deal with smart products, machine to machine, and those sorts of things. So the bottom line message here is you need to have enough mobile strategies, and enough is definitely more than one in an organisation. BYO. I had to mention BYO. Something like 75% of the discussions I had with clients last year at our big symposium conference in Orlando were around BYO. It's probably the biggest single mobile issue that CIOs are struggling with at this point in time. And there's a whole range of attitudes to this. At the far end of the spectrum, I have some CIO clients who think that in 5 years' time, the IT organisation will have nothing whatsoever to do with personal computing. Not laptops, not tablets, none of that stuff. They will just give their employees some money every month, excuse me, or something like that, and they'll bring whatever they want. Or the individual business units will buy whatever they want. Now, maybe that's a bit aggressive for most of us. But certainly, BYO is something that you can't stop. And of course, the reason you can't stop it is the first person in your organisation to buy an iPad was the CEO anyway, right? So it started from the top down, so there's no way of stopping this. So most organisations have to accommodate some level of BYO. It's not for every employee in the organisation, clearly, yet, anyway, but it is important. And it's posing lots of interesting challenges. Let me just pick up on a few of them. Legal challenges. One of the interesting legal questions where your lawyers give you conflicting advice, depending on which set of lawyers you speak to, is, are you allowed to zap, to wipe one of my personal devices? If you don't own a device, can you wipe it? Sometimes lawyers say that's okay, as long as the employee signs a declaration saying you can do it. Other lawyers say, no, you mustn't, even if the employee signs a declaration, because you don't know what you'll be wiping. I heard a story recently, for example, about a company that wiped somebody's smartphone, and as a side effect, of course, that deleted all the SMS messages which he was planning to use to prove unreasonable behaviour on the part of his wife in a divorce case. So he's suing them anyway. Does BYO save money? Probably not. Actually, I don't think you do BYO to save money, although a few people I talk to think they do. It's more about, I think, employee satisfaction. BYO has implications for things like insurance. If you go down the BYO route, your insurance company will want to know because they will think the risk profile in your organisation has changed, for example. If you go down the BYO route, you have to develop applications in new ways. You have to become platform neutral, platform independent. You can't tell whether next year's cool device will be an Android tablet, something else from Apple or whatever. And you have to start developing applications that can cater for all of those situations. You know, what do you do for the 55-year-olds who don't want BYO? You can't force people down a BYO route and things like that. And when you look at BYO, what you're trying to do is to balance those four things that I've got up here on the slide. The social goals of keeping the employees happy, the business goals of keeping the business process running, even if you don't own the devices on which it's running, the financial goals of not wasting too much money, maybe saving some, and the risk management goals of stopping bad things happening, like data loss events, for example. Which brings us on to the next slide, security. Security is a huge topic, which I clearly can't cover in any detail in this presentation. But let me pick out a couple of things. I think that as you go down the road towards new approaches like BYO, a wider range of devices, many operating systems, you have to rethink what you mean by security. And I think the people who are happiest in this situation are those where they've had a sort of a new discussion and changed the rules with the security folks in the organisation. I think that the happiest organisations are those where the security people think their job is to make innovation safe. Okay, and what's happening then is we're finding lots of different approaches to security emerging on mobile. There's not one approach. It's not MDM solves all the problems anymore. Sometimes it's approaches like containerization, where the application wraps up its own data, like board portals or certain email systems like Good, for example. Sometimes it's application wrapping with tools like Makana. Some clients have got a thin client-only strategy. They say if it's not delivered with Citrix or the web, it's not going to be delivered. So there's no data at rest on the device, so I don't care about managing the device. People are looking at new techniques like NAC, network access control, and things like this. So there's a much wider range of security options becoming available to you. And you need to look at all of these options because you can't control things in the old ways anymore, I would say. And the other thing that I've noticed, actually, while we're on security, is that one of the things BYO and this diversity of mobile has done has killed what you might call one-size-fits-all management. You know, it used to be the IT guys said, you will have this PC, it will have this standard image, that's fine. Now what I'm seeing is that every organisation has to accommodate multiple different styles of management for mobile devices in the same organisation. The way you manage the CEO's iPad and a junior salesman's smartphone will almost certainly be different. So you have to adopt security strategies to deal with those situations. Okay, so that's the end of my very quick zip through some of the interesting trends and issues in the mobile space. And maybe I'd like to leave you with a few thoughts. So when you get back into the office next week on Monday morning, understand things like the new normal, this diversity. How are you going to manage those sorts of employee needs for multiple devices? Secondly, remember innovation. Innovation is the reason for mobile, okay? So maybe we'll get the picture back, if not. Innovation is the big opportunity here. So run workshops, look at things to help you find innovations, find cool new things to do with mobile. And I'll be around afterwards if anyone wants to chat about some of the examples that I didn't really have time to talk through. Look for some of the things to do with the new devices. I'm seeing a lot of people doing very clever things with devices like iPad, for example, sometimes as PC replacements, and sometimes for really interesting things like iPads on beer pumps in bars and things like this. There are no end to the places you can see an iPad these days. And then in the longer term future, look for ways to use some of the emerging new mobile technologies like Context. Context is about applications which are hyper-personalized, exploiting location and technologies like that, for example. So, you know, the application that Nick desperately needs is the application that reminds me when I'm walking past a flower shop that it's my wife's birthday and I haven't bought her any flowers that day, you know. This sort of application will be incredibly useful for me because I'm always getting into trouble for those sorts of things. Anyway, that's me done. Thank you very much for listening. I'll be around afterwards if anybody wants to chat about any of this stuff. Thanks.